Let's open our Bibles to the book of Jeremiah and the 30th and 31st chapters. We're going to read about 4 verses there in just a moment, but as we dive into this tonight, I always like to remind you why we would spend 45 minutes tonight looking at something like the preservation of the nation of Israel. Basically, there are 2 ways of looking at the Scriptures. Either looking at them as you're not sure what they say, they certainly don't mean what they say, you could never take that literally, and so you have to come up with what it possibly could mean by an allegorical or some other method, or you just take it to mean what it says. And if it's poetry, it's poetry. If it's apocalyptic, it's apocalyptic, and it's prophetic, then God is going to do what He said. That second view, the literal interpretation view, is the way that Daniel looked upon the Bible and Jeremiah looked upon the Bible, and none other than our Lord Jesus Christ, because he spoke drawing from the Old Testament prophets of a future time when those things that they said were going to happen. And of course, that's what Paul and John also did. And so this evening, this look at Israel and looking at these 12 keys that God gives us to understand what is going to happen in the future really is the dividing line of Christendom. Because each succeeding generation in this modern time is being taught that God doesn't mean what He says, and you can't trust prophecy, and when you can't trust prophecy, you can't trust the rest of the Bible, since about 28% of it, or 29%, is prophetic. And so since such a vast part of it can't be trusted, maybe we can't trust the rest. So that's the underlying reason for covering Israel. But as we open to the 30th chapter of Jeremiah tonight, we are looking at the next of these 12 keys God has given in His Word to identify the nation among nations that will signal the end of days. Now, so much of the Bible is about the day of the Lord and the end of days. And so the Lord gave us a group of people, a national identity that we could keep our eye on so we would know how close we're getting on His clock, His prophetic countdown clock, to the end of days. And those people, as we've seen over the last few weeks, are the Jews. They are the nation of Israel. Now remember, Israel is the name of a person, and it's Jacob. And God took Jacob and gave him a name change and said, your name will no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. So Israel are the descendants of a man, a person, who was the grandson of Abraham. And we have to remember that not only are they a identifiable prophetic group, but they're also literal descendants of that person by the name of Jacob. And these keys are only part of the evidence, as we'll see that the prophesied last days are upon us, and our generation will likely see the remainder of these prophecies fulfilled. Now remember, Jesus said that those that see the beginning are going to still be alive when they see the end. The only problem is what exactly is the beginning, and how long is a generation. And that's really not important, because God's going to do whatever He wants to do with or without our tagging along. So, we just let Him take care of the unfolding. But there are so many prophecies that God declared. And on the way to our text, look at verse 7 of Jeremiah 30. We're going to be reading another verse, but in Jeremiah 30, God has declared that the most appalling time of utter destruction, both for the Jews and for the entire population of the world, is yet ahead. And it's still ahead of us. It was ahead when Jeremiah wrote this 6 centuries before Christ. And this is what he wrote. In biblical terms, God says, watch out for, and here's what it says in verse 7. I love the 7th verse. Alas, for that day is great, so that none is like it, and it is the time of Jacob's troubles. Now, who did I tell you that God renamed? Jacob. And it's interesting that God calls the nation of Israel in the tribulation time, He calls that time the time of Jacob's troubles. Remember, Jacob was the deceiver. Jacob was the one that was doing everything on his own. That so parallels what Israel's like right now. Israel thinks that because, and by the way, if you read the news this past week, they unveiled some of the most fascinating military technology that's been unveiled in years. They have this little robot thing that takes around these 6-foot-high missiles and drives them into battlefields. And their men can be out there with GPSs and lasers, and this little robot will launch precisely those missiles wherever they want them. They were so nice that the Americans, we want to buy them for Afghanistan. And then they launched I think they call it the Mosquito. It's a little handheld, looks like a toy airplane. And you go like that, and you can control it, and you can fly through windows and fly in alleys and fly over buildings and over walls, and you can just watch what's ahead so you never get ambushed. And they just keep unveiling these things, and all the nations of the world want to buy them because they're so clever and creative. Remember, it's the Jews that invented the atomic bomb. They're very, very creative and brilliant. But see, they trust in that. They trust in the fact that they have the fourth most powerful military in the world, even though they're only a percentage of the population. They're either fourth or fifth most powerful. So that's why it's called, look at verse 7, the time of Jacob's trouble. While they are so thinking that they're pulling themselves up by their own bootstraps like Jacob, it's going to be the greatest time of trouble. But he shall be saved out of it, the nation of Israel, the descendants of Jacob. Well, that's danger and misery for the entire planet that's yet ahead.